There we go. Okay. And again, so www.hiller.org is the place you want to go to keep tabs on everything that's going on in the museum. And now, with an aerial safari in Africa, it's my pleasure to welcome Mike Venturino. Ooh, you're muted, Mike.
I'm there. Just I'm just not as quick with a cursor as I ought to be. Good evening, everyone. This is Mike Venturino. I had the I don't even remember how long I've been volunteering at the Hiller Museum, but when circumstances permit, you'll see me at the FMX a couple of times a month. So I'll be happy to introduce you or to refresh you in the operations of our FMX Cessna 172 simulator. So that's a little piece of what I mostly do at the museum. But I had the good fortune to spend a 50-year career in aviation. I started as a private pilot in the San Diego area in 1965 and had the good fortune to retire from United about 10 years ago or so. So while I was at United, I taught United pilots and worked in engineering and had a great many, fortunately not very scary moments, but actually no.
The aircraft you were flying there, Mike?
I was getting to that. I was flying 727s through 767s.
Okay.
And I taught 737 pilots at the Denver Training Center for several years and checked out 767 pilots when they got to flying the line. I also did performance work for operational engineering at the maintenance base. So I got to do engineering flight tests in 727s during that time. So that's a brief synopsis of my privileged aviation career. The talk tonight revolves around three, not just one, but three safaris that I did in Africa with some others flying small airplanes in Southern Africa. And so I'll show you a few slides. We have animals and some interesting tales about what it was like to fly in that part of the world in a small airplane. So that's where we'll start. I'll just begin with sharing my screen here, see if I can get that to go. And here we go. Let's see, take that one. And so is that looking good?
I see arrow trekking on Safari.
Thank you. Since everybody's muted, which is probably a good thing, I'll need some feedback to make sure I got the right
I'll
screen.
let you know.
Okay, that works for me. So in 2010, my wife and I noticed an announcement in the Pacific Bonanza Society newsletter about someone who was putting together an aerial safari in Southern Africa. That sounded too good to pass up, and we thought it would be a once-in-a-lifetime deal. Well, it turned out to be a 3 times in a lifetime deal, because after we went the first time, we organized 2 more trips with other pilots to go. This is a routing of our first trip, and all the flights started from Johannesburg. And then this one we stayed in South Africa and went to Mozambique. Subsequent trips went up to Zimbabwe and into Namibia. So we flew a fair amount. We flew the southern part of the continent. It was a wonderful experience to see these countries and to realize this is just the toe of Africa, and it's a big place. It was really, really interesting. So I'll just do a quick summary of what we did on this trip and how we did it. Let's see, there we go. To fly a small airplane in Africa, you'll see that they all have a South African registration. So you have to get a South African pilot's license. So we all had to take our FAA licenses, and there's a procedure you go through with the Civil Aviation Authority. And in the United States, the implication is that a foreign pilot can take his credentials into the FAA, and they will give you a VFR-only private pilot's license, single engine land. The Civil Aviation Authority in South Africa required just a little bit more. They were willing to accept our licenses. However, they we had to take a little written test, and the rules are ICAO rules, and they're very similar to FAR's. So that was not a particular problem. And then we had to actually go fly with a designated examiner from the CAA. So we had to go do a mini check ride with an engine failures and some other emergency procedures and just some basic air work. That was very interesting. One of the things they thought we would have to do was actually do a precautionary landing somewhere, because we're talking Africa. And although all these airplanes are United States built aircraft, they're certified under the US rules, and we had no trouble, of course, operating them. The checkout people said, well, what if you get in trouble, you get lost, you might want to put down on a road somewhere. How many times have private pilots in the United States thought about that recently? We don't often do that. So there were some small things they wanted to see. And there was also the fact that the owners of the aircraft, sometimes their insurers wanted to check out the pilots. We weren't quite sure whether that was a means for them to make a little more money or whether they really wanted to do that because of an insurance scheme. But at any rate, this is the parking area for the first strip that we'd visited in 2010. And you can see this is our airplane up here, 182, India Alpha Hotel. And it was a very nice 182. No, what happened here? There we go. Excuse me. So after checking out and doing a small check ride to a private strip out in an area near Johannesburg, we all got in our aircraft and departed Johannesburg for this strip called Madikwe. And this is what it looked like from the air. So it was a dirt strip, and there were 6 airplanes. And so we didn't all fly in formation, but we took off pretty much at the same time and kept each other in sight. So what this picture wasn't able to show you, and I looked at some others, is somewhere up in the upper right-hand corner is the landing direction. The wind was favoring landing from the upper right-hand corner. And as my wife and I flew our traffic pattern and lined up for final approach, we got a little closer and got a little closer. And right about in the dark part up here, we noticed something on the runway. As we got closer, it looked to be about a 3-foot high pile of something. And it turned out it was a 3-4 foot high pile of elephant dung. So at about 50 feet, we just moved around it and landed in the rest of the strip. There was plenty of room to do that. So we saw firsthand what the briefing was about. We'd have to fly over the strip to clear the animals, and in this case, to look for certain deposits that might cause us some problems if we touch down on the other side of them. So that was our first landing. That was our first aerial indication of something that would be amiss here. Here's some help here. So this is not one of the cats that we saw in Africa, but there he is. So on our way in from the airport to the lodge, we saw this guy. And these are the vehicles that you would travel around in the parks to view the animals. And the important thing is when you're viewing animals in Africa, you have to get up before dawn, and you're done about 10 o'clock. And then you go out after 4 into the evening, because that's when they're out there, and that's when you see them. You really do. So, and these were among the sights that we saw as we were in our 4 hours of driving. On one of the subsequent legs, we were on our way to Cape Town, and the weather was not conducive to get to Cape Town. So we had to divert, and the place we landed was a place called Beaufort West, and the Grand Karoo is really something that looks like the Badlands in the United States. And you can see that's the 182 of one of our partners, and I was lining up behind him. You can see the crossing runway is a nice gravel strip. The wind, however, was 90 degrees to that at about 25 to 30 knots. So we were forced to either divert back to Kimberly, or they had these dirt runways that they hadn't used a while. So we decided to try that. So what you're seeing is one of my associates touching down on that dirt runway, and you can see the wind. You can see the blowing dust behind them. We ended up spending the night there, and that's another story. So, but nevertheless, one of the issues was you have to be ready for the unexpected. And the unexpected was landing on not unused nor closed, but dirt runways that hadn't been used for a while. So we were able to land there, buy fuel the next day, and fly on. So there we go. So the next stop is a elephant sanctuary, and this is our friend and guide's Husky touching down there in a very nice crosswind landing. And that was a place to, this is a notice the accommodations, and you had animals just off the porch there at the barbecue. And that's the reason you go to this particular one, is it's an elephant preserve. So the other major stop on this trip was Mozambique, which was totally spectacular. So an aerial view of the beaches on our way to this lodge in Mozambique. So here's one of our fellow aviators. That's the Indian Ocean in the background as we're flying to the northeast up the coastline towards the lodge on the coast. And here's the final approach to a somewhat grass strip at the Pomani Lodge. And sorry, there we go. Another view of this is a beach south of there. And the beaches are just spectacular. And the last stop on this trip, there's the leopard, and they're very good at climbing trees and chewing up. You can see the horns of the antelope.
Mike, did you say this was in May? When were you there?
We were in May. Yes, this was in April and May.
For May, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And there's the Cape Buffalo, and one of our guides said that the Cape Buffalo always look at you as though you owe them money. So they are just not to be messed with. And the rhino, and that was our first tour of Africa. And so we said, how can we do this again? So we put together another trip. And I'm gonna go and share it again. Yes, I know that. Here's the, okay. There's the next. This was Zimbabwe, and you can see us, Victoria Falls. And Victoria Falls is a place where we did not really think they would let us do this, but it's quite commonly done. You can fly a small airplane over Victoria Falls. The Zimbabweans have worked it out with the Zambians to allow circumnavigation of the falls at 3 altitudes, 6,000 feet for airplanes like this one, 5,000 feet for helicopters, 4,000 feet for ultralights, and 7,000 feet for the bigger aircraft. And you talk to a radar controller as well as the Victoria Falls Airport while you're doing this to coordinate. So if you can imagine, we had 5 airplanes coming along, all of us in line, taking our turns to circumnavigate the falls. And but before we got there, we came up on the Zambezi River and landed at an airstrip next to a lodge on the Zambezi. So we spent 2 days on the Zambezi, and this is kind of the thing you do when you go to take off on a dirt strip. Everybody pushes the airplane out to the airstrip so that your propeller blast won't blow dirt and gravel and rocks over everybody. Makes sense? So, and the other thing you're very concerned with is fuel. You notice the step I'm using to check the fuel in the 182. And this is our friend and guide, Dave Vanderspeet. We are tankering fuel for other aircraft that maybe don't have as much capacity. So he's not stealing it.
Quality? I was just curious about that. Is the fuel?
The fuel is fine. The fuel has got all the same safeguards that you expect from any reasonable aviation country. And South Africa has a long aviation tradition. They have very good standards. And the fuel that is available it's appropriately filtered and tested. So we had no real worries about that. And, this may look a little spooky, but the fuel in the tank is fine. And Dave made sure that the container that he's siphoning it into, because we needed to siphon it into that container to pour it into the wing of another airplane. It's just a matter of, it's a little bit of bush flying. It's what needs to be done. But we were confident the fuel was not an issue. And it turned out to be, in the 3 trips, it was never a problem. But we thought you'd get a kick out of it. Sort of self-serve in the extreme. So at this particular camp, in addition to the Zambezi, we had elephants, and you can see from the caption, we were about 300 yards away, and these elephants weren't taking any chances. They were right on. And the interesting thing was, as we pulled up, they were not in this formation. They were just kind of ambling around eating stuff. And as they saw us pull up, they immediately moved into this formation. The little ones were herded underneath, and the not so little one was between, and the 2 big guys were on either side. So they weren't taking any chances. Obviously they weren't as used to us as some of the other animals are. And here's another creature on the Zambezi. So we were actually out on boats on the river, and our guides assured us it would be just fine. Well, maybe so, but we're all here. So it must worked out okay. And on the way, I'm not quite taking off yet. You can see if you look real close, you can see the window in the 182 is still open. So we were running up. So you do your run-ups actually out on the runway, and sometimes even as you're beginning the takeoff roll, just to minimize the dirt, because you don't want to blow all the dirt behind you. So it takes a little practice. And it's certainly not a technique that I would recommend as an instructor for my students on good hard surface runways and civilized airports in other parts of the world. But it can be done safely, and we're living proof of that. So this is on our way to Victoria Falls. This dam is between Zambia and Zimbabwe, and it holds back the largest man-made lake in Africa. It's called Lake Kariba. It's a huge lake. Now we're at Victoria Falls. This is Mickey, my wife, taking a picture out the side of the airplane as we flew around the falls. Let's see, Zimbabwe is to the left and Zambia is to the right on this one. And there's another shot of the falls. It's the falls are about a mile long, and it's a big crevice. And here's the Victoria Falls Hotel, one of the prides of the British Empire. We spent the night there, and we could just imagine Dennis Finch Hatton walking through, and the pride of the British Empire. It was also the stopping point for the BOAC's flying boat service. They would flying from London, they'd stop at Khartoum, they'd land on Lake Victoria, or rather they'd land on the Zimbabwe, they'd land on the Zimbabwe upstream from Victoria Falls, and the passengers would spend the night there, and then the next day they'd fly on to Johannesburg. You can see the bridge over the gorge in the background of the picture with the the flag, that's the flagpole there that looks out from the veranda of the Victoria Falls Hotel. So the Victoria Falls Hotel faces north, it faces London. And to the left of the gorge and the bridge is the mist from the falls. And that mist can be seen almost 70 to 100 miles away. So it's the Big Smoke. And that's how it was called. So so that was a brief quick view of our trip to Zimbabwe and how that happened. And let's see, I've got to share the last one here. Okay, new share. There we go. There. Okay, so. Right. So at this, there we go. So this was our third trip, and there's some. So those are our 3 airplanes that we took on the third trip. Our airplane's in the middle at the landing field at a lodge. This will be really quick, in the Okavango Delta of Botswana. So this was remarkable on our first drive. And yes, the Leopard was that close. It was literally about 25 feet away from us. She was up in the tree staring down at us. And she doesn't care as long as we're in a glop in the vehicle. She's not the least bit interested. But if we were to get out of the vehicle, she'd be real interested. This is another part of the Okavango Delta. So you can see the canoe is the little tractor, and there's another of the vehicles that would drive along through the swamp. So here's the other story of this trip. This lion, as the caption says, and his brother were guarding the airstrip. And we took these pictures from our safari vehicle. We were safe in the safari vehicle. And we could not get on the airplanes, because if we got out of the vehicles to get on the airplanes, the lions would probably have wanted to come after us. So that's how close they were to our airplane in the background. And as the caption says, we just waited. We just had to wait. They were kind of in charge. So that was our thing. This was Namibia, and we flew to a strip at this national park to see these dunes. And that's the sunset from the desert. And this is high desert. This is 5,000 feet or so. And these are parts of Namibia. There is very little water. And that was a picture of our camp there. So when we were done, we flew home. We're flying in South Africa is all day VFR. That was all our licenses would let us do. And we would go down to 500 feet where it wasn't a game area in open country. But where they were national parks or sanctuaries, it was just like the United States. They asked us to stay above 1,000 feet. And so we did. But from 500 feet on occasion, we could see giraffes and elephants. That was pretty cool. Some other interesting points were we had GPS and charts. The charts were not very current, and there was occasions when a dam had been built and there was a big reservoir that the chart just showed a river. That was one particularly glaring thing. Air traffic control was fine. The first trip, it was a little tough to understand the accents. They had just transitioned. They were transitioning to majority rule. So all of the positions were held by people that were not white South Africans, and they were just getting trained to do this. but they did a very nice job, and they were very fun to work with, and they expect you to be polite, which was fine. On the last trip, the air traffic control I don't want to say necessarily improved, but it had gotten a lot easier to work with. They had more facilities. The controllers were more experienced, and it was closer to being in the United States. They have a few little different phrases of phraseology, and flight plans were always required, even VFR flight plans. And sometimes those could be challenging to file if you were at a bush airstrip with no cell phone service and no landlines. So we made do. So that's a quick, half-hour synopsis of 3 wonderful trips to South Africa. And I'd be delighted to take your questions, however I can find the chat here.
That's great. Thank you, Mike. As people begin to put their thoughts into the chat box, I had a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
The obvious one would be, so how much does all this cost? I mean, what does it cost to rent an airplane, and you're not paying it for the day, you're buying it for the week, I'm assuming, and without revealing state secrets, how expensive is it?
It's remarkably similar to renting an airplane in South Africa is different in one way, but in the way of cost, it's remarkably similar to what it would be if you were to rent an airplane here from an FBO that you wanted to, say, take on a 2-week trip around the country. The FBO would ask you for a minimum amount of flying time and charge you so much per hour for that. And that's exactly what was negotiated with the owners of the aircraft. The principal difference is that there aren't FBOs in South Africa that have airplanes for rent. So one of the skills of the man who organizes these safaris is knowing actual individual owners and occasionally flight schools. And he will negotiate with individual owners for 2 weeks of use of their aircraft. And he will guarantee them a certain number of hours that we'd plan out for the trip. And so that's what you would pay for. And the fuel is, they're dry rentals, so the fuel is in addition. The fuel was, at that time in 2010, fuel was $7, $8 a gallon. I mean, I didn't think it was horribly expensive given where we were. And it was, you had to plan for it. So that's about, the charge for the aircraft, I think wasn't much different than what you'd pay here. A couple $100 an hour for a 182.
Or 182.
Piper's a little cheaper.
Here's an interesting, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Mark Robachek in the group here had a question, which is an interesting one. How would you compare this aerial safari to a land safari? Because, you can also get package trips, and you've done kind of both. It sounds like, how would you compare them?
Well, the principal difference, and we talked about this, was that obviously you can cover a lot more ground with the airplanes. So in your 2 weeks in Africa, you can see a tremendous variety of terrain and, maybe and animals in some ways. For instance, the trip to Mozambique, there's no way you could do that on a land safari. And the way to get into and to do the safaris into Namibia, there's no way we could do that without airplanes. Oh, hi, Jacob.
Okay.
So otherwise, the principal cost of this is in the lodges. It's a package deal, and the principal costs are the lodges. And if you're going to go to Africa, spend the money. Go to a 5-star lodge, because they know where the animals are. They have the best people. They'll get you up at 4 in the morning to go out and look at them. And plus, the food's fantastic, and everything else is just, they have the best staffs. And our favorite country was Zimbabwe. It was the most gracious of the 3, but every place we went, everybody was very gracious. So that's a kind of a thumbnail of what the cost was, and what's the difference on a land safari.
Jane Wilson had a good question too. Did you have to requalify to fly every time you went, or
no?
one time?
no, the license was good for 5 years.
Okay.
So when we went back in 2013, that wasn't a problem. And when I went back to 2017, our friend and guide, Dave, he pulled something off with the CAA, so I didn't have to go take another flight. They just re-upped my my license. Whether it's because I was a current flight instructor or they liked my records or whatever they did, I don't know what happened. But in general, the license is good for 5 years, and you'd have to requalify. And whether you needed to take the check ride or not, I think kind of depended on whom you're talking to at the CAA. So that's what that works.
When you were flying with the group that you were with, were you pretty much, you said you weren't exactly in formation flight. Were you like in visual
Most of the time,
views
yes.
all the time?
Yeah, most of the time, yes. We didn't choose to do formation. That's way too much work. Plus, it diverts your attention from looking outside. So it was, I'd say, we could be five miles apart, 2 to 5 miles apart. And even if we lost sight of each other, we're all going to the same place, and we'd get there we usually within 15 minutes of arriving.
How far are you from the nearest airport? Like if you had your GPS and it said, go to nearest airport, how spread out are these strips and these airfields?
Well, it depends on how good an airport you want. The civilized airports, in major cities, they would be 100 miles apart or something like that, if you needed to. But as we flew down the Zambezi, for instance, there were a number of small strips that were fairly capable of land at. So for emergencies and whatnot, you were not too far away from someplace. And the terrain, most of the time, the terrain was sufficient for emergency landings. And when we were out over the savannas of the plains, there were lots of emergency landing strips. So, probably 100 miles between reasonable airports. South Africa has more, and so that wasn't a problem.
And when you guys were flying, you had a dedicated frequency, so you could just stay in contact the whole time.
Yeah, I think we picked, I forgot which one. There was one we could do, 2345 or some number like that. I can't remember what it was. Just so we could but there's also a party line frequency that's on the charts, because even though your visual flight rules, you could be VFR and you're on a flight plan from, let's say, Johannesburg, or rather from Limpopo Valley, which is on the northern edge of, on the border between South Africa and Botswana. Then we were going to another town for gas called Francistown. And we'd have approximately a routing of flight. So every 15, 20 minutes or so, you just announce in the blind on this charted frequency. It says South African charted frequency. Just give them a position report, who you are, where you're going, how high you are. So it's like they did in the 30s in this country. It's exactly like they did in the 30s in this country. So that was kind of fun.
So if you were VFR only and you had to kind of go to these strips that were planned, if you were to hire a pilot, would they be more like an Alaskan bush pilot landing on riverbanks and all this other kind of, is that the kind of flying that goes on out there?
It could be, but for these purposes, no. On our last trip, we had a local pilot fly along with one of the couples, and he was just there to help us with administrative stuff, as well as to fly the plane with the other guy, just because the other guy wanted to have that comfort, I guess, or that security to be flying with. I see, that's about right. I saw Mark Robachek here, 22 hours of flying and a 10-hour time change. That's about right. I see some stuff on the chat here. And it is, well, it's about 14 hours, I think, 12 to 14 hour flight to Johannesburg. And of course, you don't fly there directly from California. Our partners left from the East Coast to Johannesburg. My wife and I flew to Europe and then went from Frankfurt south. And we'd actually recommend that if you could afford the extra Of course, we had an advantage because I worked for United. We could fly to Europe for free. And then we had miles
Always
tickets.
a nice perk.
Yeah, it was a nice perk. So then we had miles tickets from Frankfurt to Johannesburg. But the good reason one of the reasons to do that is if you go to Frankfurt and hang out for a day or so, you get rid of your jet lag because it's north-south to Johannesburg and there's no time change to speak of. And so you can just sleep on the plane and you're a lot fresher when you get to Johannesburg.
Any issues during the safari itself, crossing borders? I mean, you had to have your passports, and did you have to get a customs check and all that kind of thing every time you landed?
Actually, yes. That was excuse me for a second. Yeah, that was actually fun in some ways. Because, it was different. And several of the pilots that were with me had gone to Mexico and they thought they were all up to date on how to cross borders. Well, this is Africa and it's a little bit different in that in Mozambique, for instance, we had to import the airplanes. Literally, they had the form to import the airplanes. And it was more than just your passport and filling out a visa form and spending money. And it was cheap. I mean, but it was a fee to import the airplanes. And they said, oh, you'll get that fee back when you leave. Well, no, we didn't get anything back. So that was an extra hassle. Otherwise, it was pretty much, and you had to pay landing fees. And when we landed in Zimbabwe the first time, I was at the head of the pack because this is the second trip. So I was sort of the experienced one there. So I took everybody into a room where they actually had an Excel spreadsheet that they used to compute our landing fees based on our little 2,500-pound airplanes. And I remember telling our friend Dave about this, and he said, "They have a computer? Oh, wow!" So it was, and we just had to wait. And the guy would take our money, stamp our passports, give us our little piece of paper, fill out the form, just do there. But we had to do that at every border crossing. And you had to clear in and clear out of each country. So we had to be, and that that informed the route of flight, of course, because not only did we have to go to an airport that had fuel, we had to go to an airport that we could clear in and clear out of customs. And sometimes those weren't the same airports. So we actually went in and out of airports that didn't have fuel because we had to clear customs and then had to fly to another airport in the country to buy fuel. So the planning was a little more involved than it might otherwise be.
Your wife keeps prompting some questions. Here's a good one.
I see that, but you already mentioned the dedicated frequency.
What about the fueling in Rudny?
In where?
Well, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right.
Rundu? Oh, Rundu. That's what it was.
What is it?
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get a slide of this. The Rundu, I wish I had the map here, but if you have a map of southern Africa, the Namibia has this little panhandle called the Caprivi Strip that dates from the colonial era when the British and the Germans and the Belgians and everybody wanted to negotiate. The Germans wanted to negotiate a river pass to the Indian Ocean. So the British ceded them this little strip of land all the way to the Zambezi because they foolishly thought they could ride the Zambezi to the Indian Ocean. And you can't do that. The Zambezi doesn't work like that. There's no way you can get, you can, if you're in a raft or in a canoe, maybe you could do that, right. But it's not that. So at any rate, the Caprivi Strip is kind of famous just because that stupid little piece of Namibia. So we had to clear into Namibia from Botswana. We left the town in Botswana just across the border from Victoria Falls. So Rundu was the name of this town. And this will be a little, and at Rundu, we had arranged for customs and they were not happy. They had to come out from somewhere. And we had arranged for fuel and but the fuel guy said, "Oh no, I'm not open," when we got there. And we called ahead and it was supposed to be open. So the guy that was with us managed to call the guy that owned the fuel. And this guy also owned a quick stop in Rundu. And this is a quick stop, looks like just like ours. It's got a mini mart and 12 gas pumps, and it's at a crossroads between that. If you go north, you go to Angola, and if you go east and west, you go to Namibia. So it's a quick stop. And so he trundles out. He finally says, okay, I'll come out there. So he brings out a trailer full of avgas, which he owns and sells. And they pump that into our airplanes using an electric pump, which they hook up to the battery of the pickup truck with jumper cables. So here's a pumping airplane fuel, high octane, avgas into our airplanes from an electric pump, which is being powered by jumper cables from a battery. So we all stood about 100 feet away, figuring one spark out of this doesn't look promising. But it worked. They got it all in there. And then all the pilots had to ride into town in the back of a pickup truck to pay for our gas at the quick stop. So we bought $250 worth of aviation fuel at the mini mart in Rundu in Namibia. And if I'd had time to put together the pictures of that, you wouldn't believe it. But it was a standard mini mart with gas pumps and a souvenir stand and whatever. It was bizarre.
Well, we're reaching our wrapping up point here, I guess. See if there are any other questions. I can think of one other one. And it looked like you had standard tires. You didn't have like Tundra tires or something.
No, these are standard airplanes. And the wheel pants were taken off, but they were fine for dirt and gravel and grass. And we all were pretty well practiced on our short field and soft field techniques. I see, the one specific animal we wanted to see on our trip, I saw a picture just for that. I'd say, I think it was the leopard. That was the one we wanted to see. But we managed to see them all. So we were really lucky. And my wife says, cheetahs. Okay.
Well, I do want to thank you for coming tonight, Mike. It was fascinating to hear about an aerial safari in Africa. I always think of it as the sort of the aviation equivalent of an adventure motorcycle trip into the world. So, you can cover a lot of ground in an airplane. So it sounds like a fascinating way to explore a beautiful country. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening for our Hill or Hangar Talk with Mike Venturino. And be sure to join us next week as we, sorry about that. Be sure to join us next week as we join Bill Yenny and his talk on attacking the Pacific coast. So give everyone stay safe, and you can give Mike Venturino a round of applause if you wish on the reactions page. You can give him a little hand clap there.
I worry about the other kinds of reactions.
And we look forward to seeing all of you at the next Hangar Talk next Thursday on June 18th at 7 o'clock. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, Jeff. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.